My name is Marcus. I'm going to be talking about animations in video games. I'm going to talk a bit non-specific, so it's going to be covering lots of part of animations. I won't be going too deep into any subject, but I'm not a 2D animator, so I'm not going to cover that part of the industry. So a little bit about me. I've been working in the games industry since 2010, after finishing my bachelor degree at Högskolan i Skövde. At the start of my career, I worked on a few indie games, shipping some games, and also working on a few cancelled projects. Ilo Milo was one of the earliest games I was working on when I started in my career. I'm currently a senior animator at Massive down in Malmö, working with gameplay animation and building animation systems. I've been at Ubisoft for a big part of my career, and here are some of the Ubisoft games I worked on so far. Tom Clancy's Division was the first game I shipped there. It was a great learning experience, and I got to work on lots of different departments. After shipping that, I got an opportunity to work on a new South Park game. Since they were using our internal game engine called Snowdrop, a very different type of animation in that game. Being a fan of the first game, I took the opportunity, and it was a fun but challenging project. I did a little bit of work on Division 2 before working on my current project, which is titled Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora. Unfortunately, this project is still under heavy NDA, so I won't go into any details about it. So let's talk about animation. So what makes gameplay animation different from film or cinematic animation? For me, gameplay animation is all about transitions and how they're handled. How do you constantly blend between deterministic outcomes while also keeping the players engaged? Animations without transitions is just a sequence that would play from A to B to C, and then creating these is what makes you an animator. What makes someone a gameplay animator is thinking about how these animations will blend into each other within the game engine while keeping them smooth but also responsive. Like spoke on the wheel, the animations branch out, and these animations need to connect to everything else, which can lead to a big spider web of states and transitions. How you set up these systems can be a fun problem to solve, but it does require a certain type of person. Animation in general is only as good as its reference, and the references are only good as a source, so finding good source material before starting in animation is very important. You can find a lot of stuff on YouTube or other video platforms. Nature footage can be a great source. If you're having trouble finding good references, or you need something very specific, film yourself for a coworker is a tried and tested methods that animators use all the time. You want to test your animations early in game. They might look great in Maya. They probably will look janky the first time you try in the engine, so I would advise you to test everything early. You don't have to spend a bunch of time polishing an animation, only to bring it into engine and having to redo a bunch of work because the camera didn't work or your idea was bad. In the end, it's the gameplay that matters. Since I'm talking about testing things early at save time, I thought I would bring up a few points on pre-production. So if you've ever been part of a long game project and you know how important the pre-production phase is, in AAA this is usually done when the team is small, maybe 5 to 10% of what the full team size will be. This means resources are limited and you have to make some smart decisions on where to put your focus. You have to decide if you want to make the character locomotion code-driven or animation-driven. This is something that needs to be locked down early because changing it later is hard. Code-driven games, the player capsule is controlled by the code. This means the animation system is reacting to any changes that happens in the code. One advantage of this is the gameplay feels much more responsive to any controller input. The other one is animation-driven games, which the player capsule is moved by the animation. It requires a lot more planning. You need to have certain metrics determined on speeds, because those are harder to change in engine. Characters move in a more natural and fluid manner. Creates a very believable look and feel to the game, but it can be less responsive. So you also want to prototype early. You do what you do with the team you have. If you maybe don't have a programming team or game engine ready, you could make a target gameplay render instead. You maybe don't have a rigging team or a character art team, so you use rigs from other projects or free rigs you can find online. Prototypes don't have to look good, so focus on finding the fun, creating the scope, and finding the metrics that you need. You want to lock down the animation pipeline. Will you be using motion capture, keyframe, deciding naming conventions, create some of the tools needed. How can the technical teams help the animators work faster and smarter? You can create a custom exporter that automatically imports assets into Engine from Maya or Blender, wherever you're working with. This can save a lot of time over the duration of the project. Check if you're going to be outsourcing any animations, because that's going to be important to have a good pipeline lockdown. At Ubisoft, we have a network of studios all over the world that help other studios with projects. This is a type of internal outsourcing, we call it, co-dev. It's been a great asset. At one point on South Park, I was working with studios in 4 different time zones, which I imagine was a challenge for the producers. So a bit about different types of animation you will be using in AAA development. I'm going to be starting with motion capture. Basically, if you're aiming for realism and you have a large scope for animation, this is when you need to use motion capture. It makes a lot more sense. I like to split motion capture data into 3 categories. So you got the planned shoot, which is something that requires a big, expensive motion capture stage, either in-house or rented. It needs hired talent, some people, actors. You want to shoot as much data as possible. So this will be like at least a full day of shooting, can even last up to a week. So this is also where you do performance capture with facial data, etc. So some of the process this is great quality data, can be a lot of fun to travel, meeting new people. It's very expensive, and the COVID restrictions have made this very difficult to execute in the past year. We also get the spontaneous shoots that the animators can do without much planning. So grabbing an XN suit or a VR system or some kind, or having a system set up in the studio. Just animators put on the suits, act out the motions they need. You can have the data in Engine the same day. Only requires 2 people. You can do it in the afternoon. And then we get the recycled old mocap data. So finding data that's been shot for another project or some other purpose. Ubisoft has a great database for this purpose with lots of tag data from all kinds of projects over the year you can search through. You can also buy data online, like stock footage in a way. It can be good for generic motions, but yeah, it's easy to test, it's cheap most of the time, and sometimes data is already clean, which is good, but you're not going to get any custom data, and the quality can vary. Yeah, quality on the data will depend on many things. Multi-camera optical system that's been set up in a dedicated space will require less cleanup than using an XN suit, for example. What is an XN suit? Yeah, it's a motion capture solution you can buy that does not require any cameras or dedicated space. So the quality can be great, but there are some limitations to it. Some systems will let you record fingers, props and weapons, facial capture, etc. The workflow with motion capture is usually you take the data you recorded, put it on your character rigs. Sometimes the proportions of the character and the actor don't match. Markers may have become obscured or not properly calibrated. So this is what you fix in your first cleanup pass. You split the mocap into smaller pieces, get the core poses in, make sure it's looping correctly. Then export it, put in Engine, and test it. And when you're recording, try filming your actors as well. This is used for reference later when you're working on the data. But you don't want to overwork the data, so this can happen if the animator does too many fixes. If they're used to hand key animation and want those clean curves in the graph, this can result in animations that's not really quite mocap and not really hand key. It can look a bit floaty. So you want to balance the cleanup so you fix any bugs in the data without destroying the underlying motion. So because realistic motion is the reason you did mocap in the first place. For cinematic animators, motion capture is like your main tool. It's a bit closer to how it works when you're working with movies and cinema. The pipeline is a bit different. You're not limited to humanoid characters in motion capture, which you might think. You can use data recorded on a human, retarget it to different kind of monster rigs or animal rigs as a base animation, and then you keyframe on top of that. I know a lot of games that do that. It's also possible to record onto a dog directly. Animals, trained animals such as dogs and horses works best in my experience. This is from Division 1. He was a very good boy. And I think the Assassin's Creed Origins team managed to put a mocap suit on a camel, which is probably an interesting challenge. And then we got keyframe animation, or hand keys it's sometimes called. So you use this for anything that's not motion captured or simulated, basically. So if you have a style in the game that's not suitable for realism or motion capture, this is what you want to use. So when you're starting with the keyframe data, what you're going to look at is like the T-pose rig, and just opening a scene like, okay, I need to create the illusion of life from this static T-pose can be a daunting task, especially if you've been working with motion capture for a long time. It can take some time getting used to it. But this is what all animators start out doing when they start animating. So it's like learning a language. It's something you need to practice if you want to stay top of your game. Keyframe requires more time to get the good quality level, so this is something to keep in mind when planning out your tasks, and hopefully the producers are aware as well. Many teams use like a hybrid approach where you mix motion capture and keyframe animation. Sometimes it's just faster to keyframe some stuff than to mocap it. For example, in a first-person game, you're doing firearms reloads. It might be faster to just keyframe it since it's really happening really close to camera with a very specific timing and staging. But you could mocap it and use for reference as a base layer and stuff like that. But then you can combine mocap, keyframe, and also procedural animation, which is my next talk. What is procedural animation? So traditionally, animations are built as predefined assets, mocap or keyframe, and then in some case simulated in Maya and baked down into engine. So when your character jumps, it plays a jump animation, it plays an arrow animation, and a landing transition when it comes back down. So an alternative way to do it is all movements or some of the movements are generated by the engine at runtime. So this often relies on simulating physics. So one of the most common ways to use this is ragdoll physics, and IK. It's been standard for 20 years or so, common on def animations and anywhere your characters needs to react with the environment. You can also combine this with IK. It lets you take a joint chain, such an arm and leg, set the desired aim point of the limb, and bend it or stretch it in order to reach the target. This is from a motion matching demo that was made at Ubisoft. I'll talk about that a little bit later. So, if you have different firearms in your game and you don't want to create unique assets for each hand pose your character needs to have, you can use IK to just set the target of the hand, so you don't need unique assets for everything. Yeah, you can create a totally procedural animation with a combination of IK and ragdoll. Some games do that, like the first one I showed. Oh yeah, this one. So this is a combination of IK and procedural to create animation. I don't think they have any predetermined assets in here. Yeah. So that's what this can look like. And then procedural animation is also great for creating follow-through and overlapping action by simulating parts of the character that moves, like wind and inertia. Got some examples. Tails, hair, clothes, accessories such as backpacks or dangly bits. So when this character runs, her hair, clothes, and accessories all move independently based on the inertia of the character. It also hides any seams and blends on the character, which is a great little trick. So just doing hand key, I think this would be impossible to achieve in runtime. But who sets up all this extra animation? It's usually handled by the technical animators or tech art, but depending on the team structure, it can sometimes fall on the animators as well. And then, yeah, motion matching. That's what's motion matching? It's still relatively new in game development. I've got this demonstration from 2016. Ubisoft Toronto created it. It's an innovative new approach for creating high-quality, fluid, and complex character movements. So instead of having lots of small animations in a big structures, they have small structured markup on top of long animations, which doesn't make sense. In traditional gameplay, there's a state machine we play. We tell it, play the run animation, then play the turn animation, play the stop animation, based on input. So motion matching, it takes a massive number of animation recorded in motion capture, just hundreds of animations, hours of data, and just chop them up into smaller pieces, put them in a database. Then at runtime, the game looks at the current pose of the character and tries to look at what the next pose of the character should be based on the future plan, basically. So it transitions with a small blend time into this other piece of data. The resulting motion is almost indistinguishable from raw mocap sequence, while still being responsive enough for comfortable control of the character. So for navigation, they don't have to manually organize transitions like starts and stops and turns. It all happens automatically. Just capture a few minutes of a person running around the big stage and import it into engine. Doesn't need a complex state machine. So some games that have shipped using this is For Honor and recently The Last of Us 2. So both of those games have pretty impressive animations as well. There's a new tech that's called learned motion matching that uses neural networks, but I'm not going to go into that. So this needs to be animation driven for it to work properly. Here's a demo from Last of Us as well. Data consistency is key if you want good results. More data is not always better, so all data that goes in needs to be curated and cleaned to match the character and also post-process, so this can be very labor intensive. And the pipeline is very different from traditional gameplay animation, so that's something to consider. Yeah, just this character, I think, is using over 2 hours of motion capture just for her locomotion. So, very realistic animation while still being responsive. You can have unlimited numbers of transitional options almost, very organic blends in that way. Don't need a state machine, and once the pipeline is established, creating new quality content can be pretty easy. But it needs technically minded animators. It can be very memory hungry, and you need a high upfront cost. You need a large mocap stage with easy access for the animators, because they're going to be shooting a lot of data. And yeah, lots of data. It can be expensive to record. I think the NPCs in Last of Us is over 6 hours of data, so that's something to imagine. They also used it for their dogs and horses, I think. So why not? So, and attention to detail. When working on big budget games, some ways you can express creative freedom can be adding small details to animation that might not be noticed at first glance, but I think they add a lot to the overall experience. Some examples I found just from playing games over the years. I started to notice a lot of details in games. So here we can see Lara Croft coming out of the water. She rings her ponytail. I think a lot of women can relate to this. I've seen my wife do this. And then another example, we can see Aloy from Horizon do the same thing, but she has a very different animation playout. She doesn't like being wet. So I think these are great for showing character personality, just for animation alone. You don't need any voice lines. Then you can also use details to add imperfection, show flaws and mistakes. Humans are not perfect, so why should video game characters be? You can see in the Sims, if your character has the clumsy trait, they can fall off the ladder while climbing out of the bed. You can also see in Battlefield, sometimes your finger might get stuck in the reload animation. Happens rarely, but it's a fun little detail, I think. You can also have characters reacting to the environment to add some personality. Here we see some bokoblins having a nice time enjoying the weather, and then it starts to rain. They don't really like it. And then, yeah, almost getting hit by lightning. Yeah, just walk it off. You can see the birds here reacting to the player, getting near the car, crouching behind the car for cover, and then she closes the door when she passes it. So this is stuff you can add to the game that can be fun. You can also have reacting to the player. So here we have a dog in Far Cry that plays dead when you aim at him. It looks pretty cute, I think. You can also see some characters reacting to Nathan Drake trying to cut in line here at the bank. They don't like it. So I think these are all scripted events, but they add a lot of personality to the game, and it makes you feel immersed in the world, I think. Making your players feel immersed in the game is important, so one thing you can add is add a lot of realism to the world. Rockstar are great at this type of details, so this is from Red Dead Redemption, where NPCs at a saloon will order dinner and eat it at their table, so this type of detail is not in every game, I can say. Another example is this fox hunting mice under the snow. I'm sure they used a lot of nature footage to get this one right. And then, of course, we've got the petting animals. Players love to do it. Animators love to animate it. There's lots of examples of this from old and recent games. So why not a ghost dog or a little VR robot dog I found. You can get some more exotic animals. You can pet a giraffe in The Last of Us. Or, yeah, why not a llama? I think this is the latest Tomb Raider. Having a pet eagle looks like fun. But I'm not so sure about the next one, which is having a pet bear. Sounds dangerous. But yeah, mostly, if there's a dog in your game, players are going to want to pet it, so put in some effort. Yeah, all types of games. Okay, so who are all these crazy people making all these dog petting animations, and what drives them to create all this madness? So what makes a good animator? So if you've ever walked into a game studio, finding the animators should be easy. They are usually the people running around their desk, waving sticks in the air or talking to a mirror. Being able to act out your animations when you plan them can be very helpful, but your coworkers might look at you funny. Sorry. One of the important aspects of being a good animator is being a team player with a strong communication skills. You will be working with designers, programmers, tech anim, audio testers in your daily routine, so make sure those interactions are as smooth as possible and you can go far in this industry. So animation is a team sport. Make sure you're helping your teammates win. You're a tool. I don't mean this in a negative sense. You're a tool for the designers, leads, and directors to create their vision. Learning to handle feedback on your animation is important. Sometimes you will feel that your way of doing an animation is superior, which can be frustrating. In a big project, the vision of the director is more important than your ego, so having thick skin is essential. It's not uncommon to have to do 15 iterations of a shot, so don't take it personal when the director keeps coming back with more feedback all the time. And then there's animation myths. So some myths surrounding the vocation is that you need to be a good illustrator in order to be a good animator. That's not true at all, at least for 3D animation. I'm not terrible at drawing. That's never stopped me. Another myth is you need to be good at coding to be a gameplay animator, so that's not true either. Most game engines have a very visual-based node animation interface, so you don't need any coding skills. So that brings me to node networks and why you need to embrace them. So this is something I spend a lot of my time doing these days, building animation systems. Many modern game engines use node networks to create blend trees that make your character responsive. So the process of creating efficient and easy-to-read animation systems is an art form that's never seen by the players, but it's highly valued by the team and can be vital for the health of the game. What makes a good animation system? Having a system that's easy to read, easy to follow the path the animation takes, makes it much more useful for animators to debug when something goes wrong. In a big team, new people are always joining the project, so the cleaner the animation graphs, the faster people can get up to speed. There's an example. Debugging is important. Having a game engine that lets you debug the animation tree in real time while playing the game has saved a lot of time for me. I think the tools keep getting better since I started. Things like being able to rewind the game and see what the animation was doing during a specific time, or being able to see every single animation variable currently in real time can be a lifesaver. So make sure you make friends with the coders and tech anim team, and you will not regret it because they will make your life easier. So who creates these systems? At Massive, this is something we have let the animators have ownership of for as long as I've been there. Some studios will have a dedicated role for it or let the tech anim handle it. There are pros and cons to both approaches, I think. But usually if an animator is not comfortable with the technical side, they can transfer to cinematics and departments, for example. Or learn. We've been moving towards giving even more control to the animators. So we've created a condition-based state machine where every state or layer that gets triggered in the game is controlled by a condition node that uses gameplay variables to determine when to turn it on or off. These things used to be more controlled by the code. So stages of animation. So when starting on a new project, the animation team might be very small and animation is usually not a big focus. So this is in the pre-production phase. You get the broken animations. They're not going to look right. Some are going to look okay. Some will look rubbish. Nobody really cares though, since at this stage everything is very raw and unfinished. So you can easily tell when you play the game. So the second part of the game is at start of production. This is usually the most challenging stage for me because this is when some animations are starting to look okay, but only the animation department really knows which animations are final and which are early in process. So for example, for the art department or level design department, it's very easy to tell when something is unfinished, like gray boxes all over the world. For animation, this is not always the case. Everyone knows how a human is supposed to move, so when it looks off, they're going to tell you. So you have to spend a lot of time explaining to people why the animation looks bad and it's not finished. So, yeah. And then the most fun of the part of the process is the polish stage, which is my favorite. This is where you get to have fun and show off your skills. Adding all those little details I showed earlier happens at the polish stage. Getting rid of temper animations, make sure everything blends together, plays nicely. This is though usually a race against the clock because time is running out, deadlines are happening. Animation is never finished, only abandoned. You don't want to get stuck at phase stage 2, so you don't get any time for polish. So I'm going to talk a bit some difference between working in AAA or indie. So this is just a classification for funding and team size. It's not really about the quality of the game. So there are some indie games that have amazing animation work and some AAA that don't. But it's mostly about the team sizes and funding for the project. So yeah, what are some of the differences? Team size can be very different. In a small team, it's much easier to learn people's names, and it can feel a bit like a big family. In a big team like Massive, there will be people from all over the world. I think we're around 50 different nationalities last time I checked. So having such a huge amount of talented coworkers also means there's always someone to learn from, which is great. So this is a picture from 2016 when we released Division 1. I think the team is probably double this now. In a big team, your role is already determined from the start. You will rarely work on a task outside your job description. So if AAA values specialists and indie game values generalists who can fill multiple roles, that means there's a lot of room for testing out different things and learning new things. But you won't get to go super deep into like one subject usually. So when I was working indie, we did not have a dedicated tech anim team. So the task of creating the rigs and the tools fell on me and maybe another animator. So that's something you might have to learn, creating all your own rigs. So funding is very different. A large team requires a large amount of funding, so more people need to be paid. So also can be stuff like software licenses, having a mocap lab, having big marketing budgets. So this can be a problem for indies because making your game visible in the marketplace is getting harder each year. But if you're spending a large amount of money, you want to reduce risks. So AAA usually is a bit more risk averse in general. Pushing the boundaries. One of the biggest appeals in indie games is they get to test the unique ideas and explore new genres. In AAA, you're investing in huge projects and you fill a specific function in that project. So there's still room for improvements and innovations and creativity, but Members of small teams will each have a wider influence of the project. So this means that also any feedback you get on the game when it's shipped is taken more personal, which can be either good or bad. It's usually. Also, career opportunities. In AAA, there's usually more stability and room for growth and career advancements. In indie, this can still be true, but it's a bit rarer. One unsuccessful project could be the end of the studio, and having to deal with publishers all the time can be challenging. Also, releasing new indie games has never been easier, but the market is fully soaking with indie games at the moment, so that means it's harder to sell your game on a saturated market. AAA games can be a big time commitment. They can take several years from start to finish, where indie games have much quicker turnaround, and making mobile games and apps are easy even faster. There used to be a trend with mid-sized teams called AA. This has been going away a bit. But I don't think that demand for AAA is likely to disappear. So there's always an audience for big budget games. But I think it's nice there can be room for both AAA and indie. So, key takeaways. Pre-production is important. You want to be a team player. That's true of any game development. It's all about communication, I think. And making games can be a lot of fun. And everyone loves petting dogs. So if you're going to put a dog in your game, make sure you can pet them. So that's my talk. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to hear, and you have so much passion about this. We have one question, and you did sort of, you might have answered it, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
What's your favorite part of the animation process?
I think it's the polish phase.
And what part of it, is it because that's where you can sort of make the character come alive?
Yeah,
or?
I think that's where you get to try new ideas or just make it look beautiful.
So how did you like you said you don't draw or anything? How did you discover this creative part of yourself that has this?
I started on a game jam project with some friends, and we needed someone to do the animations, and I was like, I can try that, doing it in 3D because it's different than drawing. I think it's more about puppeteering a rig than just drawing.
Yeah.
And then I enjoyed it, and then kept going.
So sort of by chance.
Yeah.
That's amazing. No, it's been great seeing all these things because you do, like, it's becoming more and more obvious that it's turning into this huge commitment to make the characters believable, and that it's really moving into the kind of segment between games and movie creations almost. So how about, do you have any project or any even part of a project that you're particularly proud of that you or your team have?
Yeah, I mean, all projects I've worked on, I think I've had some personal stuff put in that I'm proud of.
Any examples that you think we would know?
Probably a lot of the NPC stuff in The Division. I had a big hand in doing that, which was fun. I feel like we had some good NPC systems in the game.
Must
and then, of course, in the new project, but I can't really talk about that yet.
So when is that going to be finished so that we can invite you in after the project?
I don't think I can talk about that.
Oh, See, this is the disappointing thing about inviting people from business. We all have to sign papers and stuff. No, we don't. And then we're streaming as well, so we'll go to prison. Okay, so fair enough. We'll leave that for now. But we're excited to hear more about that in the future. Do we have any more questions from you guys here in the audience? If we don't, then I would like to say thank you to you, Marcus, for taking this time. And I do encourage you to go up and talk to him afterwards if you're here. And if you have any more questions, sometimes we don't want to do it in front of everybody else. We're going to take a little bit of a break, and then we're going to be back here for the last talk of the day. Thank you very much. Thank you, Marcus.